The parliamentary term is dragging to the end of the year, some might say. Just 6 sitting days left and Labor is trying to get its most contentious legislation through yet. The IR bill. It's an omnibus bill, and as we heard from Senator David Pocock, most of it, about 85 to 90% of it, is fine, with him at least, but there's another remaining 10% or 15% that he's not quite happy with. Joining me live now is independent MP Allegra Spender. She's in the House, of course. Allegra, we know you don't have a casting vote on this particular issue, but it would be raising some concerns within your constituents. What would you like to see happen here?
Look, I think, I agree very much with David Pocock and Jackie Lambie that there's a lot of good in the bill, and, I voted against the bill last week in the House, but I would have, if they had split the bill and, put through the 80 to 85% piece that there's a lot of agreement for, I would have happily voted for it. But, I've got 3 real concerns, I think, with the bill. One, it's been rushed, and so it's really badly understood. Secondly, you can force businesses to have to negotiate with lots of other businesses, which could be actually really bad for businesses and really slow down wage increases. And finally, a bunch of really small businesses could be forced to, negotiate with really big businesses. So I think this is a time when the government needs to hold its horses, do what's right in the long term rather than what is right sort of, for political expediency.
Yeah, Labor keeps on saying that this is central to their plan to lift wages. They're never really challenged on how that would actually work. Do you have questions about that as well?
Look, I absolutely do. And, the government has said, we really care about the care sectors. Well, you look at what happened just a couple of weeks ago. Aged care workers got a 15% pay increase. And, my community is so grateful to the wonderful workers in aged care who look after their families. So, that's widely supported. If we wanted to do the same with childcare, I believe that there would be, again, widespread support to get a big 15% pay increase right now for childcare workers. But I don't see why it's actually good for childcare workers to say, oh no, don't do that on the awards, but tie people up in, what can be really complex negotiations. Could take sort of months, even years to actually come to it. That's not actually going to make a big difference to low pay workers right now, and that's what a lot of people have real concern about.
What I find interesting is that we've seen the official wage price index, and have to remind people that government don't actually create jobs, it's the private sector. The private sector has actually seen across the board, I know this is not even, but about a 3.5 to 4% increase on public sector wages. The government's only offering 3%. So how does that make sense?
I agree. I mean, I think that's the same thing. It's like, I'm sorry, we can't afford it as the government, but no, you businesses who are still battling, across Australia on all sorts of different issues, no, you need to, increase in a different way. And look, the truth is that I would love to see wages increase, and I think the best way to do that is for businesses and their teams to work out how can we, do better, how can we innovate, how can we serve our customers differently. That's really, really important, but that's not going to be solved by, the controversial parts of this bill. There's a lot, I think, as I said, to be supported in the bill, and particularly around low wage, workers. I think that's really, really important. But I think there's a real concern that, big, small businesses in particular, but also, businesses that are changing and evolving all the time, that this is going to be really, really hard for them to get their heads around while they're still trying to grapple with, COVID and coming out of, a lot of natural disasters around the country as well, that this is a really difficult time for them.
Yeah, right now and for the next little while, we're going to be in this pincer movement, a bit of a vice between action on climate change and cheaper energy. Long term, I get that argument that it is going to change, but the government right now needs to do something about the price of gas. What do you think the solution is?
Look, I 100% agree, and I think honestly, this is, I've said the government's done a lot of good things, but I think they should have been putting more pressure on the gas companies, from the beginning of their term, because, Australian businesses, Australian households are really, really hurting, and the gas companies, they're not making extra money because they, made good investments. They're making money because there's a war in the Ukraine. At the same time, the sun hasn't got more expensive, the wind hasn't got more expensive. It's fossil fuel prices that have got more expensive, and I think the government needs to hold those companies to account and say either come to the party in terms of price, or we will put the full weight of regulation or a super windfall profits tax on them as well.
So you wouldn't mind a super windfall profits tax? What would be the caveats around that? in your mind?
Look, I think, the point I think on a super windfall profits tax is exceptional circumstances. And this is about there's a war overseas. And so, I've run businesses, and I believe if you run a business and you make an investment, you should be able to see that return. But if you run a business and there's a war overseas, which makes you suddenly make much, much more money, should you be sharing that with the people whose, resources that you're taking, or should you just say, oh, lucky me? And so I think this is the choice. And, I'd love the gas companies to properly come to the table and not have to put in that sort of windfall profits tax. But if they're not willing to make that, if they're not willing to do the right thing by Australian people, then we should do it, because it just doesn't pass the pub test. People say, well, why should my energy bills be going up like this when it's actually Australian resources, that are allowing you to make that extra money overseas?